think one of the missing components that a lot of, and I'm not targeting you, but just in general, the sort of libertarian sphere of people, they oftentimes think of it like, well, if we just present the right information, people will make the right choice. And the problem is that humans are motivated by a lot of other things, unfortunately. Right. It would be nice if everybody was an informed, rational citizen like the Enlightenment thought humans could be. And you could have I think the idea of like the founding fathers even is that, we could have the farmer who's also the scholar, and he's also the engineer, and he's also studying foreign, affairs. But really humans don't typically end up being Renaissance people. They tend to be niche, and they tend to be focused on what they do. Yep. So I think a lot of the Enlightenment expectations for the concerned citizen were unrealistic expectations. That's not to say there can't be Renaissance men or whoever or whatever people studying multiple disciplines. It's just that it's not really realistic to think that everybody's going to be able to be really informed and educated on every topic. And so what happens then is I think we recognize as we mature, hopefully, I'm not talking about you, I'm just saying we in general, we mature to realize, okay, people are motivated by more than rational support for a position. Sometimes people are motivated because they like lying. Maybe they get off on it. Sometimes people think about the mad genius, right? I mean, sometimes people can be really high IQ and be malicious with their IQ.
Absolutely.
So I think what was missing in a lot of libertarian assumptions of how humans operated in human psychology was the notion of virtue and vice, because we can talk about intellectual honesty and we can talk about epistemology or philosophy of knowledge. But if we don't have a notion of virtue and vice, then it's very apparent that we're going to miss the fact that people can be, let me put it this way. You could, not everybody loves the truth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
It's virtuous to want to know and love the truth. So we kind of have a necessity from the outset for intellectual virtue. And that's something that's totally lost nowadays.
Oh, well, that's
now, when you interact with like the blue-haired leftist, they have no concept of intellectual virtue and intellectual honesty. It's only pure power relations. That's all they see.
Well, I think you and I believe in capital T truth, and a lot of other people think they believe in capital T truth, but everyone's got their own little t truth. And like I was saying with the phones and stuff, it's allowed everyone to have the ability to then access whatever truth they want out there. And it could be Republicans, conservatives, libertarians, leftists, liberals, whatever. Everyone's got their silo of what they think is truth. And now it leaves us in this position where, if they want to believe it is a simulation, they can find anything they want out there. And it's also people, talking about vice, I guess, people they want very quick, satisfying truth as well. There's, a lot of people aren't going to be able to take the time to discover that truth,
Laziness.
Yeah. And the capital T truth that I think you and I believe in, or I know you and I believe in, that can make a lot of people uncomfortable. So then they go find the truth that makes them comfortable. Right. So that erodes the real truth. And so what I've been thinking about is, it seems like, and maybe there never was this idea of an epiphany that people could have where they can, and I think it can still happen with some people, but not in like a widespread way where, say in the news, big media type news, they release something that everyone now believes about whatever. You can say Russia, you can say Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, whatever. Not everyone's going to believe that big epiphany anymore. It's like we've had the death of an epiphany. You can't have the epiphany because what I'm saying, all these silos of little truths. So I don't know like what comes next. People say post-truth reality. I've been saying post-reality. What is next? Because it seems to be reality is just decaying further and further for people. So then what is coming? Where does it go?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, it does seem like the conclusion to what you're describing would be some form of breakdown. And I don't just mean like intellectual breakdown, but I mean, there's only so much that a system can take when you keep feeding into the system lies, deception, and just take the DEI, like affirmative action, hiring, all that stuff alone. Like if it's not the case that this person is capable to run the water plant, but we hire these people to run the water plant, for virtue signaling reasons, the water plant won't work.
Right.
So it's like the more that we enforce this weird dogmatic position, the worse things we'll get. And that's across the board, like education, all of it. So I don't see how we're going to avoid some form of breakdown. Not like black pilled or hopeless. I think that we can rebuild and regroup and set up better situations as a result of all this. But the existing system, and even some of the people in the system, the elites in the system, actually have said, we want to accelerate the collapse of this existing system. Mm-hmm. Not because they have some virtuous better situation. They believe in technocratic enslavement,
right?
But it's almost like they're just they're fine with this whole thing going away because they think that will lead to, you know, the convergence and the next phase of what they want to bring in. So I don't see how that's going to be avoidable. If like you said, the numbers of people snapping out of the delusion don't increase quite a bit.
So yeah, you've been writing about the hidden things in the world, and when I say hidden, it's funny because there are hidden things, but it's also right in your face when you talk about Hollywood, very blatantly so. And a lot of people have been waking up to that stuff in the past 5 or 6 years. I've been seeing, and like I mentioned earlier, you have a book from, I think it's 2018 when the second Esoteric came out.
Yeah, the second one's 2018. So
that's pre-COVID, you know, and the world has changed a lot. I think COVID accelerated people's perception of this hidden stuff in Hollywood. So when do you think that started in Hollywood? Is that something that's just always been there, you think? And they've hijacked that? And by they, I mean like maybe the occult or whomever. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Or did that start later on?
Definitely, it sort of came in degrees. I mean, from the very beginning, Hollywood had a pretty close relationship to various military agencies, more so maybe than other stuff. Even in the 1920s, you had people like Howard Hughes making war propaganda films. He made one of the first, what we could call a blockbuster, Hell's Angels, and that was like a World War I propaganda film, or right after war. Anyway, it was a famous propaganda film in the teens or 20s. I forget the exact year it came out. You had basically Tiny Mustache Man using the camera as well to produce propaganda films. So very, very early on, they saw the power of this medium for the state. Russia had Soviet filmmakers doing the same types of stuff. So this was done everywhere. And that thus linked, I think, early on the camera to, people in the state and the establishment. And then as you got the studio system setting up in the 20s, 30s, 40s, most of the I don't know the exact number, but pretty early on, MGM, RKO Pictures, they were already working closely with the government to put out propaganda. And really, at that stage, the government was basically saying, look, we've got Tiny Mustache Man on the rise in the 30s, 40s. We want a churning out of allied type stories and propaganda. And I didn't actually know this until the last 4 years, because when I wrote Esoteric Hollywood 1 and 2, I'd watched some, but I hadn't watched like a shit ton of old movies. I've watched a shit ton of old movies now, because my wife and I got sick of all the like degenerate, like present day crappy movies. Yep. So we decided, you know what, let's just go watch like a shit ton of 30s and 40s movies. And I've done that now. And what's very fascinating about that period is that the movies are not very sophisticated. The stories are very simple. Every now and then there's a little bit of a twisted, sophisticated plot, but there's a lot of propaganda that's there. And a lot of people, I think, didn't know that at the time. And you can very clearly tell that there's some degree of sort of government collusion there, because what happens is that later on it starts to be declassified decades later, that many of those stars were actually working for the government. They were working as spies. Yep. And this always blows everybody away, but I mean, a lot of famous A-listers have a history of working in espionage, not just in film, but like in real life, right? So it's not just American stars either. This is like stars in Europe. This is like foreign stars. Basically Germany was doing this. The Soviets were doing this. Stalin had famous actresses that were his spies. So this is a very prevalent thing.
Mm-hmm.
And even today, like more and more of this comes out and gets declassified. In fact, there was a document that the National Archives just declassified a few years ago, the espionage work of Jimmy Stewart, Cary Grant, John Ford worked with the OSS. He got his Academy Awards because the OSS was helping him. So it's like you start to figure out, oh, the system was rigged a long time ago.
What were they doing? Like, what was someone like Jimmy Stewart doing?
So in Jimmy Stewart's case, he was working just directly with the FBI under the guise of he made films for the FBI with them. He had specific access to the Laurel Canyon studios, which was the Air Force studios. You can actually look up on YouTube the propaganda films and the reels he was making at Laurel Canyon for the FBI.
Is that the Mountain Look Observatory?
That's it.
Yeah,
exactly. And the movie is called FBI Story with him. And I think he was such a super duper patriot. I also want to be clear, like, I'm not faulting all these people because, these are like great generation era grandparents, great grandparent people who they didn't really have any reason to question America and Americanism and all that. Right. So they were very indoctrinated and I'm not trying to be unfair to them. I'm not saying they're all bad guys.
Right.
I think they had good intentions, but in Jimmy Stewart's case, it was, we got to fight the commies. Right. There's commies everywhere in America. We've had the Hollywood 10. They've been brought before the committee to be grilled. I think that was all exaggerated. I don't think there was as many commies as they said.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would basically just say anybody who had sympathies for the left or whatever were commies. That was all trumped up. But it was enough to get people like Jimmy Stewart to think, well, I got to work with the FBI to root the commies out of Hollywood. In Cary Grant's case, he was asked to spy on Errol Flynn because Errol Flynn was believed to have tiny mustache men sympathies.
Right.
As were other people like Marlene Dietrich were believed to have those sympathies. They thought she was a Nazi spy. So it's great because there's these periods, right? So there's like the 30s and 40s are the period of we got to watch out for the Nazi spies. Mm-hmm. Then it shifts to the commie Soviet spies, right? So there's these phases they're really interesting with all this stuff. And that's the basis for and the reason for all of these A-list people and their, OSS CIA connections.
Meanwhile, the government then hires Nazis soon after and then fills the universities with Marxists. So what's going on there?
It doesn't have to make sense, Shane.
Doesn't have, exactly.
Exactly. To make sense. No.
And we should also, for those who don't know, like the Mountain Look Observatory on Laurel Canyon is bananas. I mean, it's this giant facility. I happened to drive by it earlier this year. At the same time, I was listening to is it Weird or Wild Scenes from Laurel Canyon? I forget the name of the book.
Yeah, Dave McGowan's Weird Scenes.
And I just happened to be there listening to it. I'm like, oh wait, holy shit, that's crazy.
You know what? I did the same thing. It's like, Shane, you're doing like a pilgrimage, a conspiracy pilgrimage. Because before I wrote Esoteric Hollywood 2, I went and did the exact same thing. I drove up Mulholland Drive up to Wonderland Boulevard or whatever it's called. To that studio, or former studio up there. I don't know if Jared Leto still owns it, but for many years he owned it. So
I was just going to ask. You said former studio. I'm like, is it former? Like, what's going on in there now? Yeah. People say they've filmed the moon landing thing there. It's like once you know some weird things about a place, then any weird conspiracy starts splintering out of these places. So it's hard to know.
Well, the website. I don't know if this website's still up for the Air Force's explanation of the studio. It admitted that the Trinity footage was all produced there.
Interesting.
And you can look up on YouTube, look up Wonderland Studios, Lookout Mountain Studios, and then put in Jimmy Stewart, and you'll get a lot of the clips of him sitting there at a desk, basically. But what's funny is that at the time, this was the most advanced studio in California,
right?
Owned by the Air Force.
Right.
And Walt Disney, Marilyn Monroe, Jimmy Stewart, Cary Grant, all those people had like special access. And we don't even know. I don't think it's all been declassified. Like, we don't even know all the stuff that they filmed there.
Right. I think we know tens of thousands of films supposedly, but we don't know what all that is and everyone there. And I think Robert Mitchum might have been a part of that at some point.
Yes, that sounds right.
speaking of like tools of deception and perception, I think the story in that book in Laurel Canyon, they talk about planting the weed story on him to kind of sell his image as like a bad boy. I think I can't remember if it's that book or not, but growing up, my parents look up to that generation of Hollywood.
Yeah.
And my dad loves Mitchum, and he was the first, celebrity arrested for marijuana. And then, come to find out, supposedly, that was all part of image building, right? Which they're certainly still doing today.
Oh yeah. Well, think about Elvis too, right? Like, they did this with Elvis where he enlisted, and that was part of we need to make you more of this America image rather than, I don't know what he was supposed to be, like a goofy, rockabilly type of goofy thing. No, we need you to be more like America and support the troops and all that. So yeah, they've been doing that for a long time for sure with pop stars and Hollywood and all of that overlaps too into I'm not trying to steer the conversation. I can talk about the spies in Hollywood all day long, but it overlaps with the cults too, because a lot of these people are also in cults. They're also involved in the occult, and a lot of the occult stuff overlaps with intelligence agencies.